Warning! You're about to experience Metamodernism Uncensored, a podcast for diagnosing the cultural rot of the postmodern world and searching for real truth. It's time to question everything, especially yourself.
Welcome to Metamodernism Uncensored, the podcast diagnosing our postmodern world and attempting to push through to achieve metamodern synthesis. And let me just say right off the bat, happy 4th of July to you. I mean, today is a massive day.
Oh, absolutely. Happy 4th of July to you, too. And, of course, to everyone listening. I mean, 250 years?
Yeah, the big 250.
Exactly. Half a millennium divided by 2. It's really an incredible milestone for the country. So what are your actual plans for today? How are you celebrating?
Okay, so full disclosure here, I actually have a bit of a confession right at the top. I am technically speaking mid-barbecue right this very second.
Wait, seriously, you left a barbecue for this?
I literally did. I just slipped away from the patio, walked inside, and locked the studio door. I'm looking at myself in the monitor right now, and I'm pretty sure I still have, like, a drop of yellow mustard on my bottom lip from a hot dog I was just inhaling right before I hit record.
That is true dedication to the craft right there. I appreciate the sacrifice of fleeing a family gathering with, mustard on your face to come talk constitutional theory.
Hey, priorities, right? But what about you? What are you getting into today?
Well, I'm actually heading to a classic American barbecue myself a little later this afternoon with some friends and family. We're going to do the whole 9 yards, burgers, fireworks, the whole thing.
You have to. You really have to. But honestly, stepping away from the party to do this today, it just feels incredibly right. We absolutely had to record this special July 4th deep dive.
Oh, completely agreed.
And I just want to take a sincere second here at the top to say thank you. Thank you to you, my brilliant co-host. A massive, massive thank you to the listener. I mean, Metamodernism Uncensored now has millions of people tuning in almost every day.
It's kind of hard to wrap your head around, honestly.
It really is. Millions of people attempting to gain metamodern enlightenment and outshine the din of the postmodern world. We are just so grateful for all of you.
It truly is a privilege. And, today's deep dive is really the perfect way to honor this specific day in history, because we are looking at the foundation of the house we all live in today.
We are. So for the listener, today is something totally unique. It's a 4th of July deep dive and an American history lesson all rolled into one. But here is the hook, the thing that really grabbed me when we were prepping. What if the so-called father of the Constitution, the man we celebrate today as the architect of our liberty, was actually the architect of a cage he ultimately couldn't control?
Yeah, that is the central and highly provocative question of the source material we're diagnosing today. There's a really fascinating article by Dempsey titled James Madison, the Father of the Leviathan.
Right. And just to give the listener a quick roadmap of where we're going, we're going to unpack the really tragic evolving legacy of James Madison. Because Dempsey's article tracks his journey from an ardent nationalist, a guy who essentially led a veritable coup to consolidate federal power.
Which is a strong word,
Right.
but accurate. Yeah.
Right. From a coup leader to a horrified states' rights advocate desperately trying to stuff the genie back into the bottle, to, finally, a man who is forced by circumstance to morph yet again.
Yeah, it's a wild ride. Because to understand the Leviathan, this massive, sprawling apparatus of the federal government we live under today in 2026, we really have to look at the exact moment its egg was laid. And more importantly, why James Madison actually thought it was a brilliant idea to incubate it.
Exactly. So let's go back to 1787. Before the Constitution, we had the Articles of Confederation. And, the narrative we all get in high school civics is that the Articles were just a total disaster, like a failed rough draft, and the Constitution swooped in like a superhero to save the day.
Right, the traditional textbook narrative.
Yeah. But Dempsey paints a much more nuanced picture of the political landscape prior to the Constitution. So what were the actual mechanics of the Articles? Like, how did it work?
It's so vital to set this scene because we really suffer from hindsight bias. We just assume the Constitution was inevitable. But under the Articles of Confederation, the United States was, in essence, a loose alliance of independent sovereign nations.
Kind of like the European Union today.
Yes, exactly like the modern European Union. Think of it more like that than the United States we know today. Now, the Articles had obvious defects, certainly. I mean, Congress couldn't easily collect revenue. They didn't have a direct taxation mechanism. There was no 1780s version of the IRS.
Right. They had to use requisitions. They had to essentially pass the hat around to Virginia and Massachusetts and Pennsylvania and say, hey, we have all these war debts. Could you please chip in?
Which is just, yeah.
Which, as anyone who has ever tried to split a massive dinner bill among, like, 15 friends knows, is a terrible way to manage finances.
Oh, completely unworkable for a national treasury. And because of this, the states just squabbled endlessly. Interstate commerce lacked any real uniformity. You had states slapping tariffs on each other's goods to protect their own local industries.
Wow, so New York could tariff New Jersey.
Exactly. So the Union felt dangerously feeble. There was this genuine, palpable fear that European powers would just pick the states off one by one, or that the whole American experiment would dissolve into these little regional confederacies.
Okay, so things were tense. But here is where Dempsey throws a massive wrench into that traditional narrative we talked about. Because he engages in some really compelling speculation.
He does, yeah.
He asks, what if they had just taken a more patient approach? Like, what is, instead of burning the entire house down, they just fixed the roof?
Right. Dempsey argues that if a more patient, incremental approach had been taken, say, perhaps just granting the Confederation Congress a very limited power to regulate interstate commerce, or giving them a specific, tightly controlled revenue mechanism like a 5% impost on imports, the Articles could have actually been preserved.
And if that happens, I mean, the entire trajectory of American history changes. Because if the Articles remained, the federal government would have correctly remained very, very small.
Extremely small, barely a blip in the average person's life.
Exactly. The bulk of power and control over the daily lives of citizens would have been left exactly where the revolutionaries originally intended it to be, with the states.
The states would have remained the primary locus of political life. But, as we know, that is not the timeline we live in. Instead, we get Madison's grand overcorrection.
Yeah. Let's talk about that.
Because when James Madison arrives at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, he isn't carrying a toolkit to just, catch the Articles. He is carrying a wrecking ball. He introduces the Virginia Plan.
Okay, let's pause on the Virginia Plan for a second. Because when I read this in the source material, I literally had to read it twice. Madison didn't just want a slightly stronger central government. The original Virginia Plan proposed giving the national legislature the power to negate laws passed by the states.
It's a staggering proposition when you really think about the daily mechanics of it. Madison wanted a federal veto over state legislation.
Wait, so any state law?
Any state law. Imagine the implications. If the state of Pennsylvania passed a law regarding its own internal agriculture or its own local judicial process, Madison wanted politicians from Georgia and Massachusetts sitting in a national capital to have the power to say, no, we invalidate that.
That is, that effectively demotes the sovereign states to the level of municipal counties. It turns them into middle management for a national corporation.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
And Dempsey characterizes this, and honestly, I think it's a completely fair assessment based on the mandate they were actually given by the states as a soft coup against the decentralized Confederacy.
Yeah.
And they were sent to Philadelphia to revise the Articles, and instead they locked the doors in secret and drafted an entirely new framework of supreme national power.
Yeah, the windows were nailed shut, literally. And Dempsey points out that this was really driven by Madison's excessive confidence. It's this dangerous assumption that constantly plays political science, the belief that because a weak government is insufficient, a highly strengthened one will somehow magically restrict itself.
Right. Like, we'll just build a bigger beast, but we'll train it really well.
Exactly. Madison looked at the weakness of the Articles and assumed the solution was a massive infusion of centralized power, confident that he could design a constitutional cage strong enough to hold it.
And Dempsey has this brilliant analogy in the text for this exact mindset. He says Madison's logic is like a gentleman who decides to enlarge his dog's kennel to accommodate a massive muscular mastiff.
I love this analogy.
It's so good. And as he's building this giant enclosure, he confidently turns to his neighbors and assures them, hey, don't worry, the beast has solemnly promised never to bite anyone beyond the garden fence.
It perfectly captures the absurdity of trusting parchment to restrain power. You are building an engine designed specifically to centralize authority and exert force. And your only defense mechanism against that engine running out of control is a promise written on a piece of paper.
But let me push back on Dempsey here for just a second. We are talking about James Madison. The man was a polymath. He was a genius of political theory. He had studied every republic in human history, from Greece to Rome to the Dutch Republic.
He really had. He was arguably the most well-read man in the country on this topic.
So why did a man that brilliant genuinely believe that mere parchment could restrain ambitious men? Was he really just that naive?
It's a crucial question, and I don't think it was pure naivete. It was more of a profound faith in Enlightenment structuralism. Madison really believed in, sort of, political physics. He thought if you balanced the internal mechanisms correctly, if you pitted ambition against ambition, the House against the Senate, the executive against the legislature, the machine would self-regulate.
Ah, okay. The whole checks and balances thing.
Right. In Federalist number 45, he tried to calm the terrified public by writing, quote, "The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite."
Few and defined. Man, those words are incredibly haunting when you look at the modern federal government.
Aren't they? But Dempsey notes that Madison likely wrote those words with complete sincerity. He wasn't running a con on the American public. He truly believed his structural design would hold the mastiff behind the fence.
But sincerity doesn't change reality, does it?
No, it doesn't. The flaw in Madison's design wasn't his sincerity. It was his failure to account for how subsequent generations of ambitious politicians would interpret that parchment. You can write few and defined in 1787 all you want, but the men who inherit the machine in 1791 or 1861 or 1933, they're the ones who get to legally redefine what few and defined actually mean.
Which brings us perfectly to the next chapter of this diagnosis.
Yeah.
Because Madison built this handsome, powerful new carriage. He expanded the kennel, he laid the egg of the Leviathan, and then Alexander Hamilton steps into the room and just grabs the reins.
Alexander Hamilton is the ultimate stress test of Madison's theories. He is literally the camel's nose poking into the tent.
Now, traditionally, historians tend to frame Madison and Hamilton as these two massive opposing philosophical forces. You have Madison, the strict constructionist, the defender of limits, and then Hamilton, the visionary nationalist, the architect of big government. They're presented as a contradiction.
Right, the classic Hamilton versus Jefferson and Madison debate.
Exactly. But Dempsey's diagnosis reveals a much deeper, more troubling dynamic here.
Yeah, because Dempsey argues, very convincingly I might add, that Hamilton wasn't Madison's contradiction at all. Hamilton was Madison's inevitable consequence.
Oh, wow. That's a heavy distinction.
It really is. Madison's the one who supplied the larger government. He created the broad, sweeping architecture of federal supremacy. Hamilton merely demonstrated what large governments naturally do once they are established and given a mandate to govern.
So if Madison built a powerful new carriage, Hamilton just pointed out that, hey, horses have an unfortunate inclination to actually pull the carriage forward.
Exactly, they're going to run.
Let's unpack the specific expansions of power here. Because the ink was barely dry on the Constitution before Hamilton started stretching it to give the federal government powers it was never actually supposed to have. Let's start with the National Bank.
The debate over the first bank of the United States is arguably the foundational argument over constitutional interpretation in our history. So in 1791, Hamilton, acting as Treasury Secretary, proposes a national bank. Madison looks at the Constitution and says, show me where it says we can charter a bank.
Right. It's not in there.
Exactly. Madison says it's not in the enumerated powers, therefore we can't do it. He's relying on those few and defined powers he promised the public.
But Hamilton just bypasses the explicit text entirely.
Completely. He invents the doctrine of implied powers. Hamilton argues that, yes, the Constitution doesn't explicitly say bank, but it does give the government the power to tax, the power to borrow money, and the power to regulate commerce. Therefore, Hamilton reasons, a bank is a highly useful tool to execute those explicit powers, making it an implied power.
It's the invention of reading between the lines, just creating power out of thin air because it's convenient. And then Hamilton pushes even further with the assumption of state debts. Right?
Oh, yeah. This was a massive move. So during the Revolutionary War, the states racked up massive debts. Hamilton proposes that the new federal government should just assume all of it, pay it all off.
Which, on the surface, if you're a state, that sounds like a pretty great deal. Like, hey, the federal government is paying my credit card bill. Thanks, guys.
Right. Who would turn that down? But Dempsey points out the structural genius and the profound danger of this move. By assuming the state debts, Hamilton fundamentally shifted the center of financial and political gravity in America.
How so?
Suddenly, all these wealthy creditors across the continent weren't looking to Virginia or New York to be repaid. They were looking directly to the federal government in Philadelphia. He deliberately bound the economic interests of the elite to the success and expansion of the central state. It made the states fundamentally secondary in the economic hierarchy.
That is brilliant, but terrifying.
Yeah.
And the mechanism he used to justify almost all of this was the weaponization of the necessary and proper clause. Let's explain that to the listener, because it's the linguistic loophole that essentially swallowed the Republic.
Yeah, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution lists the specific powers of Congress, and at the very end of that list, it says Congress has the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying those powers into execution. Now, for Madison, this was just administrative housekeeping. It meant you could, hire clerks to help collect the taxes you were already authorized to collect.
Just basic logistics.
Right, but for Hamilton, necessary and proper was a blank check. Hamilton viewed necessary not as absolutely indispensable, but rather as convenient or useful. If a national bank is a useful way to manage taxes, then boom, it is necessary and proper.
Dempsey describes this as the most elastic interpretation in constitutional history. It just demonstrated the sheer malleability of parchment when confronted with political willpower.
It really did.
And I want the listener to really reflect on this dynamic for a second. If you build a machine specifically designed to centralize power and exert authority, can you really act shocked and betrayed when someone turns the key in the ignition? I mean, Madison was horrified that Hamilton was using the powers of the new federal government to act like a powerful national government.
Which is pretty ironic.
It's a tragic irony. The parchment didn't fail because the words lacked wisdom. It failed because those interpreting it prioritized their own political necessities over the text's theoretical limitations.
Yeah, to go back to Dempsey's analogy, Hamilton didn't ask permission to let the camel into the tent. He saw that the tent was built large enough to accommodate the camel, and he simply led the beast inside. He bypassed the spirit of the document by exploiting the ambiguity of its letter.
And watching Hamilton actively abuse his creation, Madison suffers this profound political and psychological shock, which brings us to a radical pivot in his life. The nationalist of 1787, the guy who literally wanted to veto state laws, suddenly realizes the monster he unleashed. And he swings wildly to the opposite end of the spectrum to try and stop it.
This is where we see the emergence of what historians call the 1798 Madison, which stands in stark, almost unbelievable contrast to the 1787 Madison. The architect of centralized authority transforms into the ultimate states' rights sentinel.
He pens the Virginia Resolutions in 1798, and we need some quick context here for the listener. He's writing these in response to the Alien and Sedition Acts passed by the Federalist government, which literally made it a crime to criticize the federal government.
Talk about the mastiff biting beyond the garden fence.
I mean, truly. The government had given itself the power to lock up journalists who disagreed with him. Madison is terrified.
So he drafts the Virginia Resolutions, and he essentially argues that the states have the right and the absolute duty to interpose themselves between their citizens and an overreaching federal government. He is fighting back with a vengeance, advocating for the 10th Amendment, and insisting that the states are the final bulwark of constitutional liberty.
He is suddenly, desperately trying to use the very states he wanted to neuter in 1787 as a shield against the federal sword he helped forge.
It's a complete 180.
There is a specific quote from Madison during this era that Dempsey highlights, and it is perhaps the most profound realization of his career. Madison wrote, quote, "There are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments than by violent and sudden usurpations."
Let's pull that apart. Gradual and silent encroachments. Madison is articulating a terrifying truth about how liberty actually dies. It rarely happens overnight. It doesn't usually arrive with a military coup or a dictator burning the Constitution on the Capitol steps.
Right, it's the frog boiling in the pot. It's precedent. It's convenience. A politician expands executive power just a fraction of an inch to solve a temporary crisis today. And the public applauds because, well, the crisis is solved.
Yeah, they want the problem fixed.
But tomorrow, that fraction of an inch is the new permanent baseline. And the next politician expands it another fraction. Over decades, through silent, gradual encroachment, the entire architecture of freedom is hollowed out from the inside, and all the while, politicians are loudly swearing they are upholding the original design.
Which forces us into a very uncomfortable debate about Madison's character and his legacy. Because when we look at this complete reversal, historians generally fall into two camps: the hypocrisy camp or the tragedy camp.
Okay, let's look at the hypocrisy camp first.
Right, so the question is, was Madison simply a political chameleon shifting with the winds? I mean, when he and his Virginian allies thought they would control the strong central government back in 1787, they wanted massive federal power. But once Hamilton and the northern mercantile interests took the wheel, suddenly Madison wanted a weak central government. Is that just raw, cynical partisanship?
I mean, as impartial guides to this text, we have to admit it certainly looks like it on paper. There almost seem to be two entirely different James Madisons. From a strict constitutionalist perspective, his actions in 1787, leading a secretive coup to scrap the Articles of Confederation, do not match his later rhetoric about strict constructionism and state sovereignty.
No, they don't match at all. But Dempsey's diagnosis leans heavily toward tragedy rather than mere hypocrisy. He suggests that Madison wasn't a cynic. He was actually plagued by this touching, almost childish innocence.
Innocence, how so?
Well, he genuinely believed that enlightened statesmen could mathematically calculate the exact amount of centralized power needed to secure a nation, and that future generations would respectfully adhere to those exact calculations. He thought reason would always prevail over ambition.
Dempsey has a great phrase for this. He says it's the innocence of children who suppose wolves distinguish carefully between sheep intended for supper and sheep reserved for breeding.
Yes. The wolves don't care about your careful categories. Power just sees an opportunity to expand, and it expands.
And the ultimate heartbreaking proof of this tragic interpretation comes much later in Madison's life. Because he doesn't just stay the states' rights sentinel of 1798, he morphs again.
He does, and this is the part that really stings. Fast forward to the War of 1812. Madison is now president of the United States, and he is facing an existential crisis. The British Empire has invaded. They are literally marching on Washington, D.C.
They burn the White House.
Right, the Capitol is on fire. The nation's finances are in absolute ruins. So, faced with this sheer panic, what does the great defender of limited government actually do?
He capitulates to the Leviathan. In 1816, confronted with the agonizing realities of running a nation shattered by war, President James Madison signs the charter for the Second Bank of the United States.
The exact same Hamiltonian institution he had spent the 1790s declaring fundamentally unconstitutional and dangerous to liberty.
The 1798 Madison would have tarred and feathered the 1816 Madison. It's the final morph, and it highlights a deeply unsettling reality about the psychology of crisis. As Dempsey points out, every massive enlargement of state power since the pharaohs has arrived, carrying impeccable, undeniable reasons for its necessity.
Emergencies are the fertile soil of tyranny. When crises multiply, exceptions become precedents. The sweeping powers that the public reluctantly grants the government today, under the strict promise that they are just temporary emergency measures, somehow gain permanent residence in the bureaucratic apparatus tomorrow.
I love the umbrella analogy here. Let's show that with the listener. Government is like a gentleman who borrows an umbrella during a severe rainstorm. He promises to give it back the moment the rain stops.
But the rain stops, and mysteriously, he never finds a suitable occasion to return it.
Exactly. He says, well, the forecast says it might drizzle next week, better keep it. Or, well, the sun is actually quite harsh today, better use it as a parasol. The crisis passes, but the power remains firmly in the hands of the state. Madison ultimately yielded to the sheer gravitational pull of the centralized power he helped create, the very moment real pressure was applied.
And that profound failure of containment brings us directly to our present reality. If we fast forward from Madison's final compromises in 1816 and follow that exact trajectory of gradual, silent encroachments all the way to today, July 4th, 2026, what does the Leviathan look like right now? What are the dire consequences of that 1787 coup against the decentralized Articles?
This is where Dempsey's diagnosis gets incredibly sharp, and we have to look out the window and analyze our America 250 reality. According to the themes of our source material, the great power afforded to the federal government has mutated into reckless abandon. The modern federal state has ballooned so far beyond what Madison, Hamilton, or any of the founders could have comprehended in their darkest nightmares.
Dempsey observes a profound cynicism in modern politics regarding the Constitution. The document receives a courteous, almost theatrical head nod in political speeches, usually right after a politician finishes kissing babies on the campaign trail, and then it is promptly and completely ignored in practice.
It's just a prop. So let's dive into the specifics of this modern Leviathan, starting with the administrative state, because this is perhaps the greatest insult to Madison's structural design. Article 1 of the Constitution clearly says all legislative powers shall be vested in the Congress. All of them.
Right, not some, all.
But today, we have massive, out-of-control federal programs where Congress routinely outsources its actual lawmaking authority to unelected, unaccountable administrative agencies.
You have alphabet soup bureaucracies writing thousands of pages of regulations every single year, and these regulations possess the full force of federal law. I mean, they can put you in prison, they can bankrupt your business, and yet they were never voted on by a single elected representative. This completely bypasses the structural limits and democratic accountability Madison tried so hard to engineer.
Then there is the financial reality. The Leviathan requires an endless diet of capital. To feed this machine, we have crippling income taxes that seize a massive percentage of the citizens' labor. And even that isn't enough, leading to a staggering national debt.
Dempsey has a great line where he quips that our national debt has ascended into figures so astronomical that the government accountants increasingly resemble astronomers.
That's hilarious but painful.
Right. They are dealing with numbers that measure the space between galaxies, not rational financial ledgers.
And the economic burden is just one facet. Dempsey places a very heavy emphasis on foreign policy overreach. The Constitution explicitly granted the power to declare war exclusively to Congress, ensuring that the blood and treasure of the citizens couldn't just be committed to foreign conflicts by a single executive.
Yet, look at modern history. Presidents routinely dispatch American armies across the globe without formal congressional declarations of war. We maintain massive foreign aid programs, funneling domestic wealth abroad, and we're entangled in deep, complex foreign alliances that guarantee automatic military involvement.
Now, as impartial guides to this text, we must be clear. Dempsey is arguing that regardless of whether you, the listener, believe a specific modern war or social program is morally justified, the undeniable fact is that the Constitution was explicitly designed to forbid these unilateral actions. Yet they are standard operating procedure today, executed without a second thought by the Leviathan.
And what about the states? The entities that Madison once hoped would act as the great sentinels of liberty. The entities that were supposed to proudly interpose themselves against federal overreach. Dempsey's assessment of the modern state government is just brutally sad.
It really is. The degradation of the states is profound. They were once fiercely jealous of their sovereignty. Today, as Dempsey illustrates, they operate more like grown children, begging their wealthy, elderly parents for a weekly allowance.
It's a tragedy of coercive federalism. State governors spend a significant portion of their time flying to Washington, D.C. to enthusiastically compete for federal grants, waivers, mandates, subsidies, and matching highway funds. They have willingly traded their independence for federal cash.
They exhibit what you could call an affectionate dependence. I mean, a modern governor will stand at a podium and insist upon their seats' complete, rugged independence, and then turn around and hold their hand out for administrative permissions and federal subsidies just to fix a local bridge or fund a local school program.
Because the power imbalance is absolute. The federal government monopolized the taxing power, so it holds the purse strings, and whoever holds the purse strings holds the leash.
So we have to ask the ultimate question. If we could somehow resurrect James Madison today, on America's 250th birthday, and show him this immense, sprawling, multi-trillion-dollar apparatus, would he be rolling in his grave to see what his actions unleashed?
Dempsey provided a chilling hypothetical for this. He suggests that if the elder Madison were invited to address Congress today, the politicians would throw him a massive parade. They would drape the Capitol in bunting, honor him as the father of the Constitution, applaud him rapturously, and then unanimously proceed to ignore every single lesson he learned about the dangers of centralized power.
Wow. Because the hard truth of Dempsey's thesis is that Alexander Hamilton didn't defeat James Madison in the 1790s. The subsequent 2 centuries simply completed the experiment that Hamilton started. Pandora's box was opened way too early in 1787.
Exactly. By overthrowing the Articles of Confederation, they traded the messy, decentralized, squabbling freedom of a true confederacy for the sleek, efficient, and ultimately uncontrollable power of the constitutional Leviathan.
Which brings us to the core mission of our show. attempting to find a metamodern synthesis in all of this complex history and philosophy.
Right. It is July 4th, 2026. We are celebrating today, and we should celebrate. But to achieve a true metamodern synthesis, we have to be intellectually honest enough to hold two seemingly contradictory thoughts in our heads simultaneously.
On one hand, we can deeply love America. We can revere the incredible history, the culture, the genuine ideals of liberty that animated the founders, and the unprecedented prosperity of this nation. We can celebrate the 4th of July with absolute sincerity.
But on the other hand, we must grapple with the compelling argument Dempsey presents. The sad truth that it could have been so much better. That true liberty might have been better served if the federal government's immense power had been restrained early on.
If the centralization of the 1787 coup had been snuffed in its cradle, and the locus of control had remained closer to home with the states and the local communities.
It asks us to consider what was lost when efficiency and national power were chosen over decentralized liberty. So, we leave you, the listener, with a final, provocative push on this Independence Day. Dempsey's text challenges us to look out the window.
Look at the administrative state. Look at the immense, sprawling apparatus of the federal bureaucracy, and ask the difficult, uncomfortable questions about your own dependence on it. Are we the grown children begging for an allowance? Are we comfortable sitting in the expanded kennels simply because the mastiff hasn't bitten us today?
We must constantly seek after liberty and remain violently allergic to the silent encroachments of authority.
Because if there is one overarching lesson we can distill from the life of James Madison and the creation of this Leviathan, it is a timeless warning. For power corrupts, and the cradle of power the federal government corrupts most of all. Stay curious, keep pushing through the postmodern noise, and have a profound, thoughtful 4th of July.
Well, that was today's episode, Metamodernism Uncensored. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you again